United in the global fight against climate change, world leaders came together to renew commitment to a common goal, with President Joe Biden announcing a new target to halve U.S. carbon emissions below 2005 levels by the end of the decade, and more in the years beyond.
If we take action to build an economy that's not only more prosperous, but healthier, fair, and cleaner for the entire planet. You know, these steps will set America on a path of net zero emissions economy by no later than 2050.
The largest carbon emitter, China, vowed to phase down its coal consumption, even after its heavy reliance on the fossil fuel in recent decades.
We will strictly control coal-fired power generation projects. We will strictly limit the increase in coal consumption over the 14th five-year plan period and phase it down in the 15th five-year plan period. China will strive to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen also announced a wider scope to the bloc's carbon emissions trading system and its CO2 permits that put a price on pollution that will now apply to buildings and transport. Other countries like India, Canada and Russia followed suit with plans to cut back on greenhouse gas emissions, as all leaders, including the UN Secretary-General, emphasized the need for countries to do more.
We are at the verge of the abyss. We must make sure the next step is in the right direction. Leaders everywhere must take action. First, by building a global coalition for net zero emissions by mid-century, every country, every region, every city, every company and every industry.
Countries in the Paris Accord are set to give updated emissions targets in November at the COP26 climate summit taking place in Scotland. The 2015 agreement aims to keep average global temperatures from rising above 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century.
Jenny Shin with that report. Let's get the analysis. We're joined by Rachel Cletus, who's from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Rachel, thank you very much for being with us. I'm wondering how impressed you are by what you've been hearing. And can I start by asking you what you think about Joe Biden getting Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping to actually agree on something together?
Today was an extraordinary day. It was a real shot in the arm for the Paris Agreement, really re-energizing the global community. The U.S. commitment was obviously key. It's the centerpiece of the summit here, and having the U.S. come in with a bold, ambitious commitment of 50 to 52% reductions below 2005 levels by 2030. This was key to jumpstart this summit on the right note. We've seen other countries welcome the U.S. back in the game after 4 years of being on the sidelines. But meanwhile, we know that the climate science is getting ever more dire. We're watching global emissions start to jump right back up again after last year's brief dip. So this is a very consequential decade for climate action. And today was a day of hope. There's obviously a lot of hard work ahead to make sure that we can realize these commitments that have been made today, but definitely a day for hope and optimism.
Indeed, I understand it's World Earth Day too, so it's all particularly apposite. Joe Biden's calling of this virtual summit obviously is a very smart move. And also it's really shown to people that with the US back on board, there's reason for other countries to actually follow suit too and make big efforts, because if the US isn't on board, then the likes of India or Brazil might say, well, why should we bother if arguably the biggest polluter on the planet doesn't?
For sure. This is a moment where obviously this is a global challenge. We have to tackle this together. All the nations of the world have to come together. But the U.S. is the biggest contributor to cumulative carbon emissions since the Industrial Revolution. So having the U.S. Step up and take responsibility is really vital to catalyzing bolder ambition from other countries. We know that the EU and the UK are already out there with ambitious commitments. We heard from China that they're looking to peak emissions before 2030. We hope to hear more detail and have that timeline move forward as much as possible. But definitely the U.S. Taking on responsibility can be a key catalyst for global ambition.
And when you hear that the likes of Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil, sort of are basically listening to what's going on, India making commitments too, does that fill you with hope?
For sure. I mean, what we see here is the world recognizing that it's in each country's own self-interest to take these actions, and that together we can address this climate crisis. So what we heard today was really a recognition that people get the gravity of the science. They understand that they have a responsibility. But what we want to make sure is all of us, when our policymakers go back home, we still need to hold their feet to the fire and make sure they deliver on the policies that are going to be the durable way in which these commitments that are being made today are realized. And we actually see that emissions curve come down sharply within this decade. Obviously, this is a sustained effort. We'll need to keep getting towards net zero by mid-century, et cetera. But in this decade, we really have to sharply bend that emissions curve.
Rachel Cletus from the Union of Concerned Scientists, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're, of course, watching for all developments regarding the issues related to the climate, the Paris Agreement, and everything as it affects us here on France 24. Next, hundreds of people turned up at a temple in Brooklyn, Minnesota, suburb, in fact, of Minneapolis, to pay tribute to 20-year-old Daunte Wright, father of one. He was shot by a police officer on April the 11th during a traffic stop in the small city of Brooklyn Center. The preliminary inquiry seemed to show the female police officer who shot him did so after mistaking her taser for her service pistol. Just days after guilty verdicts were handed down for the former Minneapolis police officer whose killing of George Floyd set off nationwide protests and a reckoning over racism, another black man killed by police, this time in a nearby suburb, his family preparing for his funeral this Thursday at the Shiloh Temple International Ministries. Let's join our reporter Alyssa Cavalier, who's in Minneapolis. Alyssa, I understand you're at the scene. Tell us about the atmosphere. We understand the family already entered an extremely sad and restrained scene around you.
That's right. It has been an emotional few days here in the city of Minneapolis. Just 2 days ago, joy and victory in the death of George Floyd, the officer convicted of his murder on all 3 counts. So it was a joyous atmosphere just 2 days ago, and now here we are in Minneapolis mourning the loss of yet another black man at the hands of police officers. Today was a very mournful day. There was a large crowd gathered out here. They've all gone inside now as the funeral is in process. We are standing right outside the church where the funeral is being held. Daunte Wright's family came first alongside Reverend Al Sharpton, who is a big civil rights activist here in the U.S. He will deliver the eulogy today, and this is less than 1 year after he delivered the eulogy for George Floyd's family in this same city. So this is bringing back a lot of memories of something that happened very similar thing that happened just 1 year ago. And George Floyd's family is also here to support Daunte Wright's family, along with their lawyer, Ben Crump, who will continue to assist the Wright family as the investigation into Daunte Wright's killing continues.
As you say, this a community in mourning yet again, the funeral underway, and clearly one can only imagine the deep sadness that people are feeling there. Tell us more about the significance of what's been happening, though, because obviously this is another black man killed by a police officer.
That's right, and this is becoming all too common in this state and in this city in particular. So it happened just outside the city of Minneapolis, about 20 minutes outside in Brooklyn Center, as you had said. Now, it was in that suburb, and it was a 26-year veteran of the police force, a white woman who killed Daunte Wright on April 11th. That instigated many protests after his death, and there were clashes. If you'll remember a few weeks ago, there were clashes between protesters and police officers, resulting in many arrests. People raw from protesting, again, less than a year ago over George Floyd's death and the handling of that case. Now, the police chief has also resigned in Brooklyn Center in the wake of this case. He claimed that the officer mistakenly drew her taser, or mistakenly drew her gun I apologize, instead of her taser. But a lot of people aren't accepting that as any kind of excuse or even any kind of explanation. They're saying that somebody who is a 26-year veteran of the police force should know the difference between the weight of a taser and a handgun, and also how it is deployed, regardless of if it was a tense moment or if it was in the heat of the moment. So they are looking for some more serious charges. She has been charged with second-degree manslaughter, the officer in question, and they think that that is not enough, and they want some answers to what happened to their son and friend.
Alyssa Cavalier at the funeral of Daunte Wright. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to date with what's happening there, with the atmosphere as it is, and the latest on the investigation into the police officer who fired the bullet that killed the 20-year-old. We're following all developments. Next, the astronaut Thomas Pesquet is set to make history on Friday as the first French captain of a spaceship. He's set to blast off in the latest mission to the International Space Station. Pesquet and 3 other astronauts are set to launch into space as part of NASA's SpaceX mission aboard the Crew Dragon capsule. Pesquet will be joined by NASA astronauts Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur and Japan's Akihiko Hoshide. Pesquet participated in his first ISS mission from November 2016 until June 2017 and left Earth aboard the Soyuz vessel. Crew members have been vaccinated against COVID-19, and Pesquet said it would be a catastrophe if the coronavirus reached the space station. That sounds like an understatement, and clearly the mission important to keep it clean. There will be a liftoff special program here on France 24 following Mission Alpha, led by the astronaut Thomas Pesquet. Join us from 8 o'clock Paris time, 8 a.m. Paris time.